I'm Chris Lee, host of the 14 podcast. Today's guest, one of my good friends in the business, Andrew Hutchinson, managing editor at hogbeat.com. Andrew, how are you today, sir?
Doing pretty good. How about you?
Doing well. Andrew, you've been a frequent guest on the podcast over the last few months, not necessarily by design. We just have had a lot of stuff to talk about. This is the most excited Arkansas fans have been since when? Fill in the blank here for me.
You probably have to go back to the Bobby Petrino era, the 2010, 2011 seasons, just because, they are rolling, and, they seem to be right now, 4-0 for the first time since 2003, that they seem to be nationally relevant once again, and that's something that they really couldn't say during, the entire Brett Bielema era. There were a few bright spots during that time, but not quite to the level that we're seeing right now.
Well, and it's not just football. You've got baseball was ranked number one all year or most of the year. You've got basketball under Eric Musselman is at a place it hasn't been in at least a decade or two. I think even back in 2011, the overall program was not at the place it is now. My memory can fade, but that's how I remember it, at least.
Oh, you're right. If you have to go back, if you go from an overall department standpoint, you probably have to go back to the late 80s. That was before I was born. But that was back when, you had Nolan Richardson was just starting to get the really going at the basketball program, and the baseball program was, regularly going to Omaha under Norm O'Brien. And obviously the football team was a power in the Southwest Conference back-to-back Cotton Bowls at the very end of that decade. Probably that's the last time. And then maybe some people would look at like the late 70s, when you had the triplets with the basketball team, and, the baseball team finished runner-up in the 79 College World Series. And you had Lou Holtz that had Arkansas playing really, really well. So it's really, really going well right now on all fronts. And even if you look at some of the smaller sports, everyone knows about Arkansas's track program, men's and women's is always great. But, they've got the ball rolling on softball, soccer. I saw just came out. They're number 8 in the latest poll. Women's golf has been number 1. It's from top to bottom, probably the most healthy athletic department in the country.
What have Sam Pittman's secrets been? Because let's face it, when he took that job, everybody kind of laughed at it. He does not look like your corporate CEO type, which a lot of coaches tend to look like these days. And I think that's unfair, by the way. Second of all, the program, look, if we're having this conversation this time 2 years ago, Arkansas and Vanderbilt are basically the same program, and you've seen how different directions those programs have headed since coaching changes. How has he been able to do this so quickly from a point where they just were so bad?
Yeah, they were historically bad, as you mentioned, down there with Vanderbilt, and rivaling some of the longest SEC losing streaks ever in the conference for football. So, I really don't have a great answer for you other than the fact that Sam Pittman is really, as cliche as it sounds, has come in, changed the culture of the program, and really got the team to buy in. They are truly bought in. I think the players would literally run through a wall for Sam Pittman, and you could not say that under the previous regime. The previous coaching staff never really seemed to get the full buy-in from the team, and I think that's why we saw them struggle so much. So I really think that just how genuine he is and how likable. That's kind of, everybody sees it now on national media, but we've seen it since he got hired, and even back whenever he was the offensive coordinator at Arkansas. He was very personable, very genuine, and people, truly love him. I was talking to Anthony Dasher earlier, and from the Georgia site in Rivals, and he was telling me about how everyone in Georgia just loves him to death, and he's probably the most well-liked opposing coach that he's ever seen the Georgia fan base adopt in a long, long time. So I think that just really kind of shows you kind of just how he is personally, and it's led to results on the field.
How did it go so wrong under Chad Morris? I mean, at the time Arkansas hired him, I thought that was a good hire, and a lot of other people did too.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't very good. Like he could recruit, and that's about all he could do. Because a lot of these really good players that Arkansas has were recruited by Chad Morris and his staff, and he does deserve some credit for that. However, he could not. He was not a very good in-game coach, I don't think. There was times where he would make just head-scratching calls. I don't think he surrounded himself with a very good staff. I mean, John Chavis, at one point was a very good defensive coordinator, but it was at the very end of his career, and it just didn't seem like he ever was fully invested in the program. And there were times during the Chad Morris era where you're just like, man, is Chad Morris even really fully bought in? And I mean, I didn't think it was that big of a deal at the time, but Chad Morris, his wife and his son, they didn't actually move to Fayetteville whenever he got the job. They stayed behind in Dallas so he could finish his high school career at Highland Park, which is a national powerhouse and stuff. So Chad Morris was up here in Northwest Arkansas all by himself, and he would fly to watch his he would fly and watch his son play on Friday nights wherever they were playing, while the team traveled to wherever they were going, whether it be Tuscaloosa, Baton Rouge, wherever. And I just don't know if the team ever really liked that. I mean, you don't get much from the coach being there with you on Friday night from a schematic standpoint. It's not like he's going to be like, oh, here's something on film and it's going to really make a difference the next day. I mean, by that point, the hay's in the barn. But I think just the physical presence of him not being there on Friday nights, probably contributed to that. And I can't imagine, when you are going through those struggles. I mean, this is a guy that probably hasn't really struggled at all throughout his coaching career, and to be going through that and not even have your family with you in Fayetteville probably hurt him as well. And so, yeah, there were just a lot of things that didn't go well. Pretty much, it's easier to say what did go well, and that list is pretty much limited to just recruiting, because he did bring in some really talented players that are playing really well for Arkansas right now.
Well, the list of stuff that went well during the A&M game in Jerry's World on Saturday was a pretty long one, and it seemed like once that game kicked off, there wasn't a lot of doubt that Arkansas was going to win that.
Yeah, early on, it looked like it was going to be a rout. I mean, Arkansas got up 17-0. They're moving the ball down the field, knocking on the door of the red zone with a chance to go up, either 20-0 if they kick a field goal, or 24-0 if they can punch it in. But they ended up getting stopped on a fourth down. They went for it on 4th and 1, I believe, on like the 22 or 23 yard line, something like that. And that kind of gave Texas A&M some momentum. They were able to go down the field and get a field goal right before halftime. They ended up scoring at some point, I believe, in the third quarter on a long touchdown run that made it a 7-point game. And you're starting to think, oh boy, here we go again, because Arkansas has been in position to beat Texas A&M multiple times. I mean, during that 9-game losing streak, they had a 14-point lead a couple of times. They lost in overtime. They've lost, with a chance to win the game at the end of the game. Just found all sorts of ways to lose. And, with KJ Jefferson kind of getting banged up at one point, having to play the backup quarterback, you're just starting to wonder, like, oh gosh, is Arkansas going to find a way to lose this? So there was a little bit of worry there in like the third quarter, early fourth. But by the time Arkansas got that interception in the fourth quarter and were able to tack on that field goal to make it 20-10, there was time on the clock. Texas A&M still had time to get back in it, but at that point, you felt pretty good they were going to be able to finish it off.
Andrew Hutchinson at Hogbeat is our guest. Andrew, how good is KJ Jefferson now? How good is he going to be?
Well, he's a lot better than I thought he was going to be. And I thought he was going to be a solid quarterback, but he's still just a redshirt sophomore. This is his first year as a full-time starting quarterback. And as you know, unless you're a generational talent, I mean, unless you're a Tua Tagovailoa or someone like that, you're going to struggle your first year as a starting quarterback in the SEC, especially if you're a young guy that hasn't gotten a lot of experience leading up to it. But he has really not had as many growing pains as I expected him to. He still has some issues that he has to work through, accuracy things on short and intermediate throws. But the dude throws an incredible deep ball. That is a really nice aspect of his game. I want to say he's like 8 of 13 on passes 20 yards downfield, according to Pro Football Focus. Really, really good in that aspect. Plus, it helps when you got a guy like Treylon Burks to throw the ball too. But he could still work on that. Plus, he has the aspect of being able to beat you with his legs. I mean, he's easily the best running quarterback Arkansas has had since Matt Jones in the early 2000s, if that's a name fans may remember. So he's just a dynamic playmaker, and I think he's just going to get better. And I think the other thing that really has going for him now is he's got those intangibles that you want out of quarterback. He's a very good leader. I mean, he was elected team captain by his teammates, and his teammates and the coaches at every turn have said, this guy is a really good leader. This is his team. He is the guy. And I think that it really shows whenever he's on the field, in that, they believe in him, and they're going to move the ball. It may not always, look perfect, but they are going to move the ball, and they've been scoring, outside of this Texas A&M game, which, again, I believe if KJ hadn't gotten hurt and played the entire game, Arkansas would have scored more than the 20 points, and they probably would have won more than just 20-10. But still, he has done really, really well and exceeded my expectations through 4 games of the season.
Well, the other thing that helps, they got Treylon Burks going. Not that we didn't expect that, but he really busted out and had a huge game in Arlington after kind of a little bit of a rough start. I mean, certainly he's an elite receiver, and the first couple of games didn't match the level of play to which he's capable, but man, he sure turned it on in that one.
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, he got off to a little bit of a slow start. In that Rice game, he actually had a couple of drop passes. You don't expect to see that from him. But he had also missed about, 2 weeks of fall camp because of an injury where he hadn't practiced. And really, I didn't think he was going to play in that first game against Rice because of that. But he ended up getting back to practice, I believe, on like that Wednesday or Thursday a little bit. And so he was really rusty. I mean, it was obvious. And then, of course, against Texas, I think he caught 5 first-half passes, and then he really didn't do anything in the second half, but that was because Arkansas was averaging 7 yards a carry against the Longhorns. So you really didn't have to do anything in the passing game. We saw a glimpse of it against Georgia Southern when he took a screen pass 91 yards to the house. That was like, okay, Treylon Burks is okay. He's going to be fine. And then, of course, against Texas A&M, 6 catches for 167 yards. He caught an 84 or 85-yard deep ball from Jefferson for a touchdown, where even though he kind of stumbled out of the gate, so like he kind of like was not, it wasn't like super smooth. I mean, he kind of tripped a little bit, and he still outran the defender that was on him, one-on-one coverage. Not a wise decision by the Aggies on that play, but he is starting to look kind of like the Treylon Burks we saw last year. And I fully expect him to kind of keep it up. I mean, is he going to have 100 yards every game? Probably not. But they are going to find ways to get him the ball and make things happen, because he is a dangerous playmaker.
Well, except for maybe some stretches in that Rice game, which now seems like it's a million years ago, that defense has looked really good. Their linebacking crew has got like 124 years experience between their starters. It's crazy. Just address what they've done to be so successful so far.
So the biggest thing about Arkansas's defense is that it's multiple. And that's another one of those cliche buzzwords you hear coaches talk about and use all the time. And you're like, okay, whatever. But really, they are truly multiple. Usually you say, okay, well, they're a base, 3-4, they're a base 4-3. Arkansas has used a 3-man front in 2 of its games and a 4-man front in the other 2 games. And they align differently even when they're in a 3-man front. They had 2 5 techniques in the Texas A&M game, and I believe they had like a 4-eye and a 5 technique in the Texas game when they went to the 3-man front. And really the way they're doing it is because they actually have an effective pass rush this year. Last year, they could not get after the quarterback pretty much at all. They really struggled. I think the team leader last year in 10 games had 2.5 sacks. Not very much. This year, they went, they got some guys out of the portal. They got Trey Williams from Missouri, former 4-star recruit. They got Markel Utsey from Missouri, and then they went and got John Ridgeway, a big defensive tackle out of Illinois State, from the FCS ranks. And man, has he been a find. I mean, that guy is a mountain of a man, and he has been really, really good for Arkansas in that middle of that defensive line. But Trey Williams was the story of the Texas A&M game. He was just tormenting that core Texas A&M left tackle. I think they ended up playing 3 different left tackles in that game, and he whipped all of them. He was consistently getting to the quarterback, had a couple of sacks. He drew a couple of holding penalties, had some other hurries. Just a truly dominating performance. And when you get a rush from a 3-man front, that allows you to drop the other guys back in coverage. And if you got 6 defensive backs on the field, Arkansas is really, really deep at defensive back this year. Jalen Catalon is obviously the headliner there, but Monteric Brown is really good. Greg Brooks, Joe Fouché. That has really been a good recipe for Arkansas. And so far, it's really working for them. And I'm anxious to see how they line up and try to attack this Georgia team, because, as I said, they've been lining up in different fronts the entire time.
You studied A&M a good bit coming into that game. You saw them play. What do you make of them at this point? Because I think that's a team that's obviously very flawed, and I really question their ability to get things together, given that the games are just going to come flying with one tough opponent after another. They got quarterback issues. They got offensive line issues. After seeing the Aggies play, what do you make of that situation right now?
I think you hit on it when you touched on those quarterback issues. I feel like that's a different team if Haynes King is healthy, because based on everything I've read and talked to some Texas A&M people, everything, Haynes King can actually move around a little bit. He's more of a dual threat guy. And, if you have those offensive line struggles that they definitely do have, you need a guy that can move a little bit. And Calzada's got a good arm, but he was always running for his life, and he's not a guy that can, when he runs, he's not going to take off and get you 20 yards or something like that off of the scramble. I think Haynes King brings a little bit of that, and I think that would help if he's able to get healthy and return. But of course, who knows how he's able to move when he does return, because there's a broken leg. So that's going to be interesting to watch. I mean, they definitely have talent. I think that defensive line is still really good. I don't know if it's maybe the best in the country, like I think some people thought. But they definitely have pieces. But again, right now, with the way they're constructed, seems to be a little flawed, and I think that offensive line is a big reason to do with that, because they're not blocking well, and then you've got a quarterback that's not able to run around as much as the other guy that they had in there.
Okay, Alabama is still the number 1 team in the country, though some might dispute that and say Georgia is. We know Arkansas now is a force to be reckoned with in the West. Ole Miss looks like it is too. We're going to find out more about the Rebels pretty soon. But look at the rest of the teams. I mean, Mississippi State, Auburn, LSU, and Auburn and LSU play each other this weekend, which is going to be really interesting because whoever loses that game is going to have a really unhappy fan base. But of those other 3 teams, who intrigues you the most? Who do you think's the best one of those?
That's a good question.
And by the way, I ask you because I don't have a good answer myself. I mean, those are 3 teams that are really hard in my mind to know where those seasons are going.
Yeah, I mean, I lean toward maybe LSU just because the talent is there. I mean, it seems like they have more talent than, say, an Auburn or a Mississippi State. So I would lean toward LSU. From an Arkansas perspective, I think LSU is probably the toughest matchup because one, Arkansas has to actually go down to Baton Rouge this year, whereas Mississippi State and Auburn both come to Fayetteville. But I mean, we've seen. I mean, Auburn should have lost to Georgia State. We saw Mississippi State lose with some help, granted, to Memphis. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like LSU is probably the scarier of the teams just because they have the talent. It's just a matter of will they put it all together and make something of the season.
Let's go back to Arkansas for a minute. The only problem I have with the Razorbacks is one that's completely out of their control, and that's that schedule, which, my goodness, I'm trying to remember the last time I saw this one this tough. I mean, they've already booked wins against A&M and Texas, which is, look, that's more good wins right there, or as many as some college football playoff teams bank in a year. But they've got coming up at Georgia, at Ole Miss, and then Auburn at home. I think back to back with no breaks. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then they've got Alabama and LSU on the road at the end of the year. I'm just like, here's what a pet peeve of mine that I don't want to see. This team could go 8-4 and have a tremendous year, be deserving of the top 10. And I would hate if that happened. And by the way, if that's 8-4, then that's 2 wins against, probably Georgia, Ole Miss, Auburn, LSU, Alabama, somebody in that group. That's a tremendous season. I hope that this doesn't get derailed by the number to the right of the dash, because I think they look like they're headed for a special season. But that schedule, my goodness, it is crazy.
Yeah, it's unbelievably brutal. I mean, having to play Texas A&M, that's technically a quote-unquote home game, but they play it at a neutral site at AT&T Stadium. So you're away from home for that. So you're away 3 straight weeks against 3 possibly top 10 teams for each of them. I mean, who knows where Ole Miss is going to be ranked after they play Alabama. But that's a brutal stretch. And then you return home and have to play Auburn. And I'm not convinced Auburn is a top 25 team, but it's still a solid SEC team that you're going to have to try to beat. That is a brutal stretch. And I do think that if Arkansas wins 8 games, I feel like most fans will appreciate it for what it was. And that is a truly remarkable season. I didn't think there was any chance that they would compete for 8 wins this year. I mean, I thought that the range before the season was 5 to 7 wins. And I thought that the 7th win probably hinged on, could they upset Texas? I didn't think they would beat Texas A&M, much less win both of those games. I didn't think they, I still don't know if they have much of a chance against the likes of Georgia and Alabama. I mean, those are the number 1 and number 2 teams in the country on the road. Probably not going to beat those 2 teams, but, Ole Miss, you do have to go on the road for that one. Maybe you can win that one. That's always an incredible game between Arkansas and Ole Miss. They play some wild games, but it's not easy, that's for sure. And I think an 8-win season would be certainly deserving of a very high ranking at the end of the year, because that would be, as you said, mean beating some really good teams along the way.
Yeah, SP Plus, which had them 5.3 wins before the season's got them at 8.5 today, and that's one of the biggest jumps in the country. I think SP Plus, no rating system is perfect, but that's one of the better ones out there. So that's interesting. And it's also telling, right? Because here they are undefeated, and this is saying 3.5 more losses to come. But again, we know why.
Exactly. And I think the ESPN Football Power Index is right along there too, like 8.3 wins or something like that. So it seems to be most projections are starting to recognize, okay, Arkansas is actually good. I mean, that thing too is they're not just beating these teams. It's not fluky. I mean, they thoroughly killed Texas. I mean that was a blowout worse than the 40-21 final score. Really, the 20-10 final score, it felt like it was worse than that against Texas A&M. So they are soundly beating teams. But again, I mean, when you've got Georgia and Alabama on the road, I mean, that almost is 2 losses just right off the bat right there. I mean, sure, I wouldn't be, completely shocked if Arkansas went into Athens and won that game, but I would be pretty surprised. So it's tough. I mean, it is really, really tough. It's unfortunate that they don't have one of those schedules that has, a South Carolina or Tennessee or Vanderbilt or someone like that as the East opponent, because then you'd be looking at possibly a 10-win season, and if that was the case.
Yeah, you get Missouri, which is a game that I'll be surprised at this point if Arkansas doesn't win, because I just don't think Missouri can defend.
Yeah, that's a game I think Arkansas fans really, really want to win, because it's not quite as frustrating as the A&M losing streak, which they lost 9 straight to the Aggies, but they have lost, I believe, 5 straight in that series against Missouri, and some pretty just ways they shouldn't have lost. I think they blew like a 24-7 halftime lead one year. They found a way to lose last year after leading with 45 seconds left. So that's a game I think Arkansas fans really want to win to kind of get back where they believe, like Arkansas fans believe they are a better program than Missouri, and yet the results on the field haven't shown that. And I think fans really want to change that this year. And as you said, I feel like as things stand right now, Arkansas's got a good chance of doing that.
We're talking on a Tuesday afternoon. I know you have the first basketball practice to cover later today. The preseason polls are coming out. Arkansas is consensus top 25 from what I'm seeing in the magazines. I think maybe even as high as the top 10 or the lower end of it, maybe some places. I'm looking at Lindy's. They've got Arkansas picked 5th in the SEC. I know it's going to be a good year. I don't quite buy that low, but in any case, Arkansas expected to contend for a league title, at least in my mind. How do you see that?
Yeah, they seem to be trending in a really good direction. I mean, the Elite Eight last year has people in Arkansas really, really excited. And, obviously you lose Moses Moody to the draft. Justin Smith was a key player. Jalen Tate was a key player. Those guys moved on, graduated. But you do return, Devo Davis. You return Jalen Williams. Those guys were freshmen last year and really flashed some really good things. And you think they're going to continue progressing. And you add some really good transfer pieces, as Eric Musselman always does. Stanley Amude from South Dakota. Chris Likes from Miami. Tony from Pittsburgh. They added some really good pieces, and I think they're going to be a force to be reckoned with, and it should be a really good season. I'm anxious to see. I heard earlier that there's only I want to say 700 upper deck seats that are still available for season tickets this year. So Bud Walton Arena should be packed out and rocking most of this season, which is unfortunately an experience we had to miss out on last year because of all the COVID restrictions. So it'll be a really fun season in Arkansas, and I'm looking forward to it. As crazy it is to start thinking about basketball with football just being 4 games in, there's a lot of excitement to go around across campus.
Yeah, it is great to see that building rocking again. I'm a little older than you, and so I remember what that was like back when Arkansas used to just be a force to be reckoned with everywhere, and that place was lit, and you'd go to conference tournaments, and they'd have about as many people there as Kentucky did. I mean, it was just a crazy time for Arkansas basketball, and I'm really enjoying seeing them be back there again because I think it's better for the league. But, yeah, you addressed the transfer issue. I mean, those 2 Big East guys are terrific. I mean, I think you could argue that Arkansas, in terms of bringing in transfers, which is a lot of what Eric Musselman does, is done about as well as anybody in the country in the offseason. But is it Umude kid from South Dakota is really interesting because, his numbers last year, he averaged almost 22 points, 7 boards, 3 assists. I mean, he's a stat sheet stuffer. Sometimes those mid-major type guys work out, and sometimes they don't. But he's the one to me that's really intriguing.
Yeah, he's one of the in the country last year, and so I'm anxious to see what he can do based on some stuff that we're hearing, just kind of words kind of leaking out from the coaching staff and everything, is that he has really looked impressive during practice, and he could potentially be a leading scorer for Arkansas. But the thing that's so intriguing about this team is that you don't look at it and go, okay, this guy is 100% going to be your number 1 or number 2 scorer. There's no doubt in my mind. there's just so many guys, and we're not 100% sure on what those roles are going to be. And that's not just us as in the media and fan base and stuff. I think it's truly the coaching staff. I'm anxious to see what Eric Musselman says about it later, but I don't think they know what the roles and stuff are going to look like yet. And it may be one of those years where, it takes a few non-conference games before they really kind of get that ironed out. But yeah, that Umude guy is really good. I mean, the Chris Likes kid from Miami, I think he's listed like 5'7" or something, but he's apparently electric, and despite being very small. So I'm just really excited to see what they all look like, and of course how they mesh. I mean, Eric Musselman seems to always make it work whenever he brings in a ton of new pieces from the transfer portal. But I always wonder, like, how are these guys going to mesh as a team? And I think getting a full off season, not having to deal with all the COVID stuff that they had the previous year, should help with that.
Andrew, it's been a fun time with you today. At this rate, heck, we may have you on every week, given the way Arkansas keeps winning big games. But anything else worth mentioning with the Razorbacks before we end the episode today?
Well, I mean, I think we've hit pretty much everything. Baseball team seems to be in a really good point as well. They're still trying to figure out exactly what that pitching rotation is going to be, but I think they're going to have a salty offensive lineup, offensive firepower once again. Lots of young pieces that could contribute to that. But other than that, we are full on with football at hogbeat.com, and that is something, in the past few years, once we got to week 4, week 5 of the football season, most people were already turning their attention to basketball and baseball, and we are not experiencing that this year, to say the least.
Andrew Hutchinson's been our guest. He's the managing editor at hogbeat.com. That is the Arkansas site on the Rivals Network. Andrew, before you go, tell folks what's coming up at your site this week, and tell people where they can follow you on social media, if you would, please.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that I talked to Anthony Dasher from the Georgia site, the Rivals Network. I've got a Zoom chat with him that we'll be publishing on our YouTube page. Should be Wednesday, so if you want to go check that out to get kind of a Georgia's perspective on the Arkansas-Georgia game this weekend, it's a really good conversation. And then as well as we've got all sorts of content coming this week, as far as we look at the starting lineups between Arkansas and Georgia and kind of how they compare. I think it's going to be a dramatic difference in favor of Georgia, but it's always a fun contrast to make. And then, of course, we've got all sorts of other recruiting content going on. There should be a big-time basketball recruit that is going to be making his announcement on Wednesday evening. That could be big news for Arkansas. So lots and lots of stuff happening. And if you want to keep up with that, you can always check it out at hogbeat.com. But I'm also posting it on Twitter for my account, NWA Hutch. You can give me a follow there on Twitter and get access to all that stuff.
Yeah, and he's a great follow. If you're an SEC fan, and especially an Arkansas fan, you need to be following Andrew. Andrew Hutchinson's been our guest from hogbeat.com. Andrew, thanks for joining us. Look forward to the next time that we can chat with you.
Sounds good. Look forward to it.
All right, I'm Chris Lee, the host of The 14. We'll see you again Friday with another episode of our podcast.